My turn. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo. Where you question, where you fit, and every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. And man, hopefully everybody had an incredible Thanksgiving, incredible time with your family, your friends. You ate some good food. I enjoyed having this week off, which unfortunately for me is never really a week off. I just end up working on other things that I don't have time for throughout the normal work week. So I wish I could say I got really well rested throughout the course of that little week-long break, but sadly, nope. More work to be done. Always work to be done, but I don't know. I guess that's how I enjoy living life. I enjoy what I do, so it's a blessing to be able to do more of it and to have some extra time to scratch the itch of a couple of projects that I've been kind of putting off. So, man, I hope y'all enjoyed your time off. If you had a few days off, had a long weekend, I'm excited to be back, especially because what we're talking about on today's show, man. So I've been slacking on this. So it's actually the last day. So it's actually we're almost at the last day here of Puerto Rican Heritage Month as per New York City. And crazy Rudy Giuliani, when he was the mayor of New York, did declare this to be Puerto Rican Heritage Month, the month of November. So I wanted to try and do an episode on Puerto Rico, but not just Puerto Rico itself, but I think kind of what a lot of the basis of the show is, right? I think for so many of us, we are searching for that connection to our culture and maybe our community. And defining what it means for us and our own experiences and how we see the world, but still trying to maintain some sort of semblance and some sort of attachment to our ancestry, right? And for me, I thought this would be a great way, even if you're not Puerto Rican, to kind of take you on a bit of my journey and also give you a bit of history of what's happened in Puerto Rico and what is currently happening. I mean, I think it's important for me to use my platform for good and to try to shed light on certain things. And again, even if you're not Puerto Rican, I hope this inspires you to deep dive into wherever your family's from. And also, I think as we are, in the Latin diaspora, just one big family, I think it's important to kind of be aware of what each of us are kind of going through or what we're struggling with or, the issues that face our place of origin, especially as I talk about this idea of unity amongst Latinos, regardless of where you're from. I think it's important to understand what's, really relevant for us and our community and each place that we, call home as far as our ancestry goes. So I want to do a bit of a dive into Puerto Rico and, again, a bit of my story and kind of where I'm at when it comes to refinding my culture and ingratiating myself in my community. So we'll do a bit of that. We'll kind of start a little bit differently today. We'll begin the show with the Mi Gente segment. I want to kind of share a bit of my story and kind of, again, where I'm at mentally when it comes to our culture and our community. And then for the people in the back, we'll do a bit of a deep dive into what's going on in Puerto Rico, what has happened, the effect that the U.S. has had on my place of ancestry, and why it's incredibly important, for all of us to recognize it. There's some human rights issues at hand, and we should all care about that, right? So without further ado, let's first kind of get into my headspace a bit in our Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. So I've talked about this a bunch. I'm not going to kind of harp on it too much because I know in even this season I've discussed a bit about, sort of separating myself from my culture and not being as in tune with it, and then getting to a place, especially post Hurricane Maria, where I recognize how important it was for me to be, a part of my community and to celebrate that part of myself and to have that attachment and to advocate on behalf of, right? And since that, I've definitely sort of re-fallen in love with Puerto Rico, and that's a place of, my ancestry. And for me, it's funny how this whole journey of embracing, myself authentically has also allowed me to genuinely love and find a sense of comfort in my culture. I was in Puerto Rico over the summer or the end of the spring, visiting my grandfather who was at the time very sick, and thank God he's made a full recovery. But while I was there, I just remember stepping off the plane and being in the car and just feeling at home, like genuinely feeling like I was home, and I felt a sense of comfort and just warmth, and that was just being in the surroundings, being in the area, being back on the island. And I don't think that that's a connection that I had when I was younger. I can remember coming to Puerto Rico when I was a kid. We would go every summer, and yeah, it was fun, but it almost seemed like a bit of a burden. And obviously, when you're a kid going on vacation with your parents and them choosing the destination, it's the same one every year. You don't tend to appreciate it, but I definitely didn't have this same sort of sense of connection where I felt like everything I was seeing and the people I was speaking to were all an extension of me, right? And just like a deep love and appreciation for it, And recently, my girl and I have been planning a trip. We're going to be going to Puerto Rico very soon, and I had actually called the restaurant that we wanted to go to, and I was making a reservation, and I recognized like a really important moment. It was like a very subtle thing, but I was talking to the person on the phone, and just hearing their voice, the accent, there was like a warmth that came over me, right? There was a comfort that came over me, in feeling like I was speaking to my people, And again, that's not something that I've ever really experienced growing up. This is like a new phenomenon for me where I genuinely really feel that connection. And I think it's probably also, a part of my own personal growth, right? Where I have, done a lot of self work and learned to love myself as I am, right? And I think in doing so, you find ways to love every part of yourself, and you find ways to kind of maybe find a home in the places that felt foreign to you, right? Again, my culture, my community was a sense of, man, a part of me that was insecure, right? Because I didn't feel like I truly fit in. And I think now, not being concerned about fitting in, but instead just truly celebrating myself allows me to feel that love, and ironically allows me to be ingratiated for the most part, by my own people. And of course, you're gonna have your haters. And there was that TikTok video of that went viral recently of this girl like saying, if you don't speak Spanish, you're not a real Puerto Rican. And that's a conversation for another time. Anybody listening to this podcast knows that that's just a ridiculous assumption and argument. But outside of those, wacky people, I genuinely feel at home in my culture and in my community. And, a part of that, especially with having a platform that speaks to Latinos and is centered around Latinos, a part of that is also speaking on behalf of my community and fighting for them, right? And that's kind of a bit of I think where we are as Puerto Ricans right now. Obviously there's a lot to celebrate, but at the same time, we are at an interesting crossroads in our history right now, where we're living in modern day colonialization, right? Where the United States owns Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States, and granted, we have our own constitution in Puerto Rico, and our own governor and all these different things. It doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, the ruling, body of the land is in fact the United States. Yet the people of Puerto Rico, while they are citizens, can't actually vote for who's in office, right? The person that has the direct impact on their life. And we'll kind of get into, examples of how important that is. But for me, I could sit here and celebrate, all the incredible things that are happening, which they are, right? We have incredible people like Bad Bunny being such a great representative for our culture and our community. And we obviously have a very proud community of people. But in speaking about, Puerto Rican Heritage Month, and and wanting to do an episode centered around that, I thought it was important to kind of talk a bit about the struggles that Puerto Rico has gone through, and the ones that we currently, go through. For me personally, this has become something that is a really, man, focal point, I think, for my life's work. And I'm still sort of ironing out what exactly that looks like, and how I plan on making a difference. But in the grander scheme of things, I foresee myself, operating a nonprofit that is helping, the island of Puerto Rico and the people of Puerto Rico. And that's kind of where I see a lot of my focus sort of shifting eventually, as I begin to get in a position where, I have the means to focus more time on that. But those things are happening behind the scenes. I'm planning a lot of that kind of stuff out, and that's kind of, I think, the beauty of my growth. I know I'm kind of going on a bit of a tangent. I'm just following a train of thought here I'm having, but I think for anybody listening, this is kind of what the goal is, right? Is you to be able to show up authentically and honor all parts of yourself, but still have a deep love and attachment to your ancestry, right? Because that I think is the fundamental base and the core of us, and who we are, right? And then we allow ourselves to adapt different parts of life experiences and different cultural things from living here in the States and growing up here in the States, But I think at our core, the beauty of us being Latino, and regardless of what country, or island that you call home, the beauty of having this culture, this community, is that we always have a place to call home, right? We always have a culture to go back to, a vibrant culture that is still thriving and actually, growing. And that's something to me that I was missing for so long. And that has definitely added to a bit of the fulfillment that I feel in my life, feeling like I celebrate that part of myself, and I have an attachment to that part of myself, has brought a lot of that fulfillment that I was searching for a long time. So, I think that's kind of the gist that I want people to get out of this idea, and what I'm sharing about, where I am in my journey, and I had mentioned this last year around this time, but even bringing back, old traditions from Puerto Rico, like Three Kings Day, which I didn't grow up celebrating. We just did Christmas, but making sure that is now a focal point for me and my family moving forward, that we continue that tradition from my ancestry, and it's something that I now plan on hosting at my house. And last year we had my parents come over for it. This year I'm looking to extend it to my sister and my niece and nephew and my brother-in-law, and just making, it sort of a cornerstone of my life as I move forward, and making sure that I have those parts that I honor, that ground me in who I am and where I come from, and I think that's probably what many of us are searching for. And I think embracing old traditions and learning your history and learning the current things going on in the places that you're from, I think, is an incredible start for anybody who's looking for more attachment to their culture and where their ancestry developed, right? And I think that's what a bit of today's show is about, a bit of my journey right now as well, of what's getting me kind of fired up and getting me riled up, if you will. And honestly, I'm blessed that I have a girlfriend who she's in law school and she's studying a lot of this stuff, and she's been gracious enough to put me on to a lot of the different things historically that have affected Puerto Rico, and a lot of things that remain intact and kind of take us to where we are right now. So with that said, I want to do a bit of that deep dive in our For the People in the Back segment.
Say it louder for the people in the
All right, so like I said, I wanted to not just celebrate our culture, our community for Puerto Rican Heritage Month, but also discuss a bit of the history, right? And listen, I'm not a historian, I'm not an attorney. I'm giving you my own interpretations to the best of my ability with the assistance of others, what's going on in Puerto Rico right now is sort of this old world, new world that's happening right now, and the reality is there's no other way to slice it. Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States of America, right? And we're in an era where that is frowned upon, yet the United States still refuses to do anything about the status of Puerto Rico. Refuses to give them statehood, refuses to give them independence. We're just in this sort of limbo state, and it's had a lot of implications for the people of Puerto Rico. And there are issues on the island from policies by the local government, but as well as the United States and remnants of historical events that the U.S. has caused. And I think a lot of people fail to understand the complicated history and the violent history that the U.S. has imposed upon the people of Puerto Rico. I think there's like this outside notion, and even for many people on the island, that like the U.S. is a savior. Thank God for the United States. But the United States has also caused a lot of bullshit on the island, and really complicated, where we are as a people and our ability to have our own sovereign country. And I think, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I want to just kind of talk about some of the issues that are going on in Puerto Rico, right? And I plan on trying to get other people on from the island that we can talk about this more in depth. But I just kind of wanted to have a basis of things that are going on. I mean, I've talked about on the show gentrification that's happening on Puerto Rico, right? And it's due to these tax breaks that are being given to outsiders. And listen, this is a policy that was enacted by Puerto Rico's own public officials, right? And I know a lot of people would say, "Oh, gentrification happens everywhere," But what you have to realize is that Puerto Rico, these are people that were born and raised there. They have a thriving culture, a thriving community, and you're pushing them out of a place and not giving them an opportunity to have a place to live. And this isn't just a random state that their family landed upon, right? That their family immigrated to. This is a place of deep history for these people, for our people. And the more they get pushed out of their own island, the more that history begins to get washed away. And that's what's incredibly scary about the idea of gentrification, right? I think it's a bit different than over here where I'm from in Brooklyn getting gentrified. And I understand for many people who grew up there is a lot of historical context, but your history, only begins when your family immigrated there, right? For us as Puerto Ricans, the history goes all the way back to the indigenous people of the Taino Indians, right? Where that bloodline still does exist in many Puerto Ricans on the island, right? So, and the African lineage and Spanish and all of the above, right? So it's a bit of a deeper, so the feelings are a bit deeper as far as the ownership of the island, because again, many of the people who are inhabitants currently of the island of Puerto Rico have lineage back to the first people to ever walk foot on that, ever step foot on that sand. And no, I'm not talking about Christopher Columbus. I'm talking about the indigenous people. And I think that's what a lot of people are missing when they sort of talk about gentrification happens everywhere, And then, another thing that we've heard people talk about, Bad Bunny talked about this, in his concert in Puerto Rico, where he was cursing Luma, which is the electrical company, the privatized electrical company of Puerto Rico, and they've been providing subpar service while price gouging people. And this is a contract that was signed, with the governor and this private company, Luma. And, the CEO of Luma is making like $1 million. Meanwhile, people in Puerto Rico are having trouble having, consistent electricity. And their contract is, up for renewal right now. There's supposed to be a protest actually tomorrow, protesting potential renewal of this contract. And the only real reason for renewal would be corruption at the end of the day, right? If it does get renewed, it's because the governor, Pierluisi, is getting some sort of handout from this contract. Now, those are the problems facing the island of Puerto Rico that I think have been self-imposed. But when you talk about where many of the problems begin for the island of Puerto Rico and sort of this dark history that I feel like a lot of people in the United States don't tend to recognize, is based upon a lot of racism and how the United States viewed the people of Puerto Rico, right? And they've consistently viewed them as lesser than. I mean, I think the great starting point would be what's called the insular cases, right? And this is like the legal framework for Puerto Rico's status as what they call an unincorporated territory, right? And insular cases are a series of cases that were decided in 1901 that were pertaining to the legal status of territories, right? Puerto Rico obviously being one of them. Now, you have the two notable ones that people talk about, which is Downs v. Bidwell, and I'm not gonna get super crazy into all this stuff because I know not everybody is interested in law or an attorney. But the second case they talk about is also De Lima versus Bidwell, right? Now, in these cases, you had a merchant. And the question before Downs v. Bidwell, just a quick synopsis, was whether a merchant could recover a tax that he paid for oranges in New York from Puerto Rico, right? And the merchant asserted that his constitutional right was violated by the tax because in Section 8, in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, it states that taxes must be uniform across the United States. And Puerto Rico, being a territory of the United States, his argument is that the tax code should be the same as it is for every other state, and Puerto Rico should not be held differently, right? And what you have to understand is during this time with the insular cases, the Supreme Court was incredibly racist, right? You had Justice Henry Billings Brown, who actually was the author of the Plessy opinion, which was the separate but equal doctrine, which is essentially segregation. So the same person who was in favor of segregation for black people and white people in this country also was presiding over essentially the do's and don'ts of what Puerto Ricans would have to deal with as a territory in this country, right? And actually, he actually wrote that the United States territory, meaning Puerto Rico, was not truly to be a part of the United States because it was, quote, inhabited by alien races differing from us in religion, customs, and modes of thought, making them unable to understand, quote, Anglo-Saxon principles. And this is the basis for the status of Puerto Rico today. Now, of course, there have been plenty of other cases since then. Puerto Ricans have been given citizenship. Now, many would argue it's because the United States wanted to be able to draft them to war, and the timeline seems to fit very well when it comes to that. But again, Puerto Ricans are constantly kind of just given like a sliver to keep them quiet. Meanwhile, they have no real rights at the end of the day. And again, I understand Puerto Rico has its own constitution and is its own governing body. But at the end of the day, the United States has the final say when it comes to anything, right? Puerto Rico's constitution does not supersede the United States. And there's all types of quotes from these different opinions. I mean, in De Lima v. Bidwell, one of the quotes that was pulled from there was, "The danger of the nationalization of savage tribes cannot arise." So they're calling the people of Puerto Rico the savage tribes. They're saying they're an alien race who culturally cannot, be in the same conversation as the Anglo-Saxons, right? And I'm just talking about the sort of basis for many things that are currently going on when it comes to Puerto Rico and the United States, right? Like we still use this framework from these cases as reasoning, right? And this framework and this reasoning, we still use them today as good law, right? Like the idea that Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory because they're, quote, savages or they are, quote, alien races, right? That couldn't possibly, sit next to our Anglo-Saxons. No, these people are beneath us, right? And you just have to keep in mind, even if the court case to you, this whole idea is a boring concept. I'm setting the base for the idea that Puerto Ricans, and this has been consistent when it comes to people of color, have never been looked at as equal by the United States, right? And they're just showing you this in writing, but I think we can all safely assume they feel the same way about any Latin country. And we know damn well, based on history, they felt the same way about Black people and still continue to do so. So this is just showing you the history of the racism that has happened in this country, and specifically with Puerto Ricans who are, a quote unquote, who are citizens of this country, but really that's it. They're not given much other rights, and you think about things like, the gag law of 1948, where it was criminalized, to have any display of the Puerto Rican flag or to be singing La Borinqueña, right? The Puerto Rican national anthem. All of that was criminalized by the United States, right? And it was also criminalized to speak, write, or gather for Puerto Rican independence, right? So we live in this country that sits here on its high horse, and we celebrate the idea that we broke free from the colonizers, right? The British. Yet we then went and did that same thing to another place, to Puerto Rico, right? And to me, it speaks to a lot of like the social mindset of hurt people, right? So many of the United States, founding fathers and the people here who were here in this country who were being taken advantage of by the British, when they got the opportunity to be in power, they essentially set set in motion a society that kept looking for someone else to now look down upon, right? They used to be the subservient group of people, right? Where the British government looked down on the Americans as being lesser than, right? So now the Americans come into power and they have to find other groups to now look down upon, right? And it becomes people of color, Black people, Latin people, right? Any other race that isn't white, essentially, and specific whites, and then eventually they adapt other whites into it. But that's a whole nother story. But I think what I'm trying to get at is when you look at the modern day society, and I think that government is the same exact way. It's like, look at somebody like Elon Musk, for example, right? I don't know the man's history, but I can imagine he probably wasn't very popular in school growing up, and now gets money, and now gets notoriety, and he himself is turning into the bully that probably bullied him, right? And I think that if you look at the history of this country, it's basically what America has grown to do. We were once the bullied, now we have become the bullies, right? And Puerto Rico is another perfect example of that. When you look at so many things that have happened, I mean, the sterilization of women in Puerto Rico, where 1/3 of Puerto Rican women were unknowingly sterilized under the watch of the U.S. government, and this was done exploitative U.S. policy, claiming that Puerto Rico was overpopulated, right? And that this is why this sterilization needed to happen. Like you think about all of these things, and they're claiming that Puerto Rico was overpopulated. But it was then written by William Hunt, the governor of Puerto Rico, who wrote in a report to the U.S. in 1901 that not only could Puerto Rico comfortably keep the 1 million inhabitants we have now, but have 5 times that number, end quote, right? So Puerto Rico is being claimed to have been inhabited, right? And that's why they need to, start putting in these different sterilization practices. And there were laws on the books that, claim poverty was a viable reason for sterilization, right? Anything that they could use. But as we see, overpopulation of poverty, of impoverished people is an excuse. But the reality is, as we see by these findings, Puerto Rico was not overpopulated, right? So you look at this once again, and it's got racial undertones, right? The idea that this was instead a means for white supremacy to take action, right? To protect white people from too many of these people of color, right? Again, the U.S. allowed this to happen, allowed its own citizens to be unknowingly sterilized. And why did that happen? Because they were poor brown people. And again, it just sets the history for Puerto Rico, I mean. And listen, there's all types of other terrible stories. I mean, you have Dr. Cornelius Rhodes, who was suspected of infecting Puerto Ricans with cancer, and wrote, all about how he had a plan to exterminate Puerto Ricans. I mean, this is scary shit that we don't, have to go too deeply into. I mean, you have the largest FBI surveillance of any American population happened in Puerto Rico. You had the United States history of bombing its own citizens, 2 times happening. You also have, one of the 2 times where the U.S. bombed its own citizens happened in Puerto Rico. You have things like, the Ponce Massacre, which happened in 1937, where a peaceful civilian march turned into police shooting peaceful protesters at the request of the governor who, was taking orders from the U.S. government, right? And then we push to, modern times in Puerto Rico, and you think about things like Hurricane Maria, right? Where you had the Trump administration. It's been proven that they delayed more than $20 billion in hurricane relief, right? And this is according to a report by the Housing Department's Office of the Inspector General, right? And they said the efforts to deliver recovery funded to the island were, quote, unnecessarily delayed by bureaucratic obstacles. And this is according to a 46-page report, right? And that hurricane hit in 2017, killed thousands of people, left thousands without electricity and water for months. And they're playing games with people's lives, right? And this even happened recently, right? I'm somebody who voted for Joe Biden, but I have no problem calling out the nonsense where you had, after Hurricane Fiona, you had a ship carrying diesel fuel that the island was in dire need of. It was unable to dock in Puerto Rico for several days while it awaited federal authorization because of the Jones Act, which is a century-old shipping law that states, all ships must pass through the U.S. customs first, and then from there, they're able to bring the goods to Puerto Rico, right? It's stating that, no foreign ship can land on the island of Puerto Rico directly. And Biden dragged his feet on this, right? And it just shows you, once again, the negligence, and the lack of priority that the Puerto Rican people are. And again, it is just a symbol of the way that this country has historically viewed people of color. We're not a priority. We are viewed as lesser than. They'll do whatever it takes to try and keep, white supremacy alive, to make sure that white people maintain power and make it as difficult as possible for people of color to achieve that same level of power, right? And we've seen it, like I said, with some of these cases that I'm pointing out. I mean, there's been a ton of other ones, but also just in general, I think when you look at the current status of Puerto Rico, where even recently you had Republicans, saying that they would never make Puerto Rico a state, out of fear of it becoming another Democratic, voting bloc, essentially be electoral votes for the Democrats. These people are playing games with the lives of Puerto Ricans just to maintain their own political power, right? In creating these stalemates and not doing anything to address the status of Puerto Ricans, right? To be able to profit off of them, but not give them full rights as American citizens. They're able to be drafted into the military. They pay some taxes, right? And yet they don't actually get to vote on who's the president, right? And you look at a place like Washington, D.C., which is not a state, but they still get electoral representation, right, when it comes to the presidency. Why doesn't Puerto Rico? And again, the only real answer is because they view us as lesser than. They don't want brown people having a say in this country if they can help it. And in Puerto Rico's case, sadly, they can help it. Now, that's just like a bit of the, a tip of the iceberg. I want to have somebody on here who does this for a living, but I just wanted to, bring that up and begin to kind of like put anybody on some game who is not necessarily familiar with all of these different things, because I just think it's incredibly important to understand this knowledge. Again, even if you're not Puerto Rican, I think that this is an example of how the U.S. views people of color, specifically Latinos, right? And how they view us as lesser than and expendable at the end of the day. Now, with that in mind, let's kind of tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in our segment called Conclusion Stew.
Time for Conclusion Stew.
All right, so I know I threw a lot at you in the form of history and court cases and dates and all these different things and really just dark moments. I would suggest anybody who's Puerto Rican, you're interested in this kind of stuff, even if you're not Puerto Rican, War Against All Puerto Ricans is a great reference point, a great book to kind of understand the dark history between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. And they talk about many of the things that I mentioned here in far more in depth. Like I said, I want to bring somebody on who is far more knowledgeable about this kind of stuff, just to kind of really be able to deep dive into it. But I wanted to kind of be able to at least play my role here in making sure that I utilize my platform to shed some light on, the dark history that Puerto Ricans have gone through, and then what we still go through till this day, right? As a result of being in this sort of limbo status. And I know we've had these votes, these referendums in Puerto Rico where, people get a chance to vote for statehood or independence. They're non-binding. They don't actually mean anything. And most people don't actually even show up because they know that they don't mean anything, right? That's a counter argument that I've heard many a time from people on the internet. So I want to make sure I clear that up. But I think at the gist of this, for me, a big part of getting back in touch with my culture was learning the history, and then in knowing my history, making sure that I was a proponent and an advocate for wanting better for our people. I think that that's also a huge component to getting in touch with that side of yourself, is making sure that you're doing your part to help our culture and our community continue to thrive. Right? I think we all have a part to play in this. I think, depending on where your ancestry is from, there may be more immediacy, for you to have to play a role in it. Again, with all that's happening in Puerto Rico right now, a lot of the conversations that are happening, a lot of the new generation pushing this independence movement, these conversations are incredibly necessary to be brought to the table and to be given a platform to be discussed and for the truth to be brought to light, especially when we talk about much of the dark history in the U.S. But many of our countries, many of our people are going through something. When you talk about what's going on at the border and what our people are fleeing from and why they are in such going through such dire circumstances to hopefully have a better life here in the States. Like we all need to be well versed on what's going on in our community and in our culture. I think it's the only way that we can kind of push forward and making sure that we are each a positive advocate for where we come from. Not necessarily everybody has to be out there on the front lines, or in media or whatever it might be, but even being able to just be educated to, put people on who may not know, anybody that you run into in your everyday life, being able to give them the real story. Because as I'm showing you, when it comes to the dark history, like that's not what we're taught in textbooks. That's not what's spoken about publicly when it comes to America and the dark history it has with many of our countries and communities, right? And I'm speaking specifically to Puerto Rico, but that's something you had to really dig deep, and somebody had to write a book where they really dug deep into the history to put us onto all of those things, and having that knowledge, I think, empowers me to go out there and combat any of the nonsense that people might be assuming based upon the limited teachings that they've had in school of my ancestry or on the news, where it's rarely spoken about. And I think we should all be empowered to be able to kind of try and break through some of that noise when given the opportunity, when we're out there in the real world. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning in. We'll be back on Thursday for our Thursday Trends episode, of course. Getting back in the swing. I'll tell you what, a week off, man, it fucks me up. I don't know if it does for anybody else. Even though I was still working on other stuff, like the idea of getting back in the swing of all of this, I'm probably gonna need a week to really get back into like my routine and being on top of everything. But man, happy Puerto Rican Heritage Month for all my Puerto Ricans out there, my Boricuas. And I appreciate anybody else, if you're not Puerto Rican and you made it this far and you are putting yourself onto some history. And I think that, again, for me, in finding myself, a lot of that is really just learning, diving deep into my roots and where I come from, and reading about our history, the good, the bad, the ugly, so that I can, pass along that information and make sure that our stories are told, and that they don't die, and that our history is told and it doesn't get swept under the rug like sadly it's been for far too long. So, man, that said, catch you on Thursday again. Dramos.com. Y'all want some merch? Like, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help the show out. I appreciate y'all. I've been seeing some new ones come in, so thank you so much for that support. And that's it, man. I'll catch y'all next time. Until then, stay safe. Peace.